welcome to this session, which is exploring the impact of peer review innovations on the future. We have a exciting 60 minutes ahead of us. We have a great panel here to discuss how we see the future of peer review and how the review process itself is likely to evolve. We are just going to wait about 60 seconds to let everyone log in and make sure they can see my screen, see me and the panelists. The session is being recorded, so we won't wait forever. Plus, we've got lots to talk about anyway. This session is a part of the official peer review week of 2023, and it's hosted by Cactus in association with EASE, the European Association of Scientific Editors. And we are very excited to be working together on this particular session today. I think we've had 60 seconds, so I think we will start. So, as I say, we are very happy to be looking at this session today, breaking the mold, exploring the impact of peer review innovations on the future. And Cactus and EASE are happy to present this. We have a little bit of housekeeping to do at the start, which revolves around me showing you some of the things Cactus are involved in. As I finish this, I will then introduce the speakers, and then we will start with a few questions. If you have questions of your own, please put them in the chat window, and then I will be able to see them, and I'll be able to present them to our panel. So, Cactus is a science, communication, and technology company that specializes in AI products and solutions that improve how research gets funded, published, communicated, and finally used. Cactus works at the intersection of science and industry to enable communication and enhance the visibility and impact of research. And you can see some of the things we're involved in here. I'm not going to go through them all, but I will highlight some of them. So we are trusted advisors who help make research more accessible, accelerating global science and human development through a combination of inspired individuals and great technology. To this effect, our various brands are tailored to make researchers successful and research consumable. Our brands work with you to offer end-to-end expert support for specific needs throughout the research cycle and beyond. So now that that kind of housekeeping is out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the panel. And the first person I'm happy to introduce you to is Phil Jones. Phil, would you like to intro yourself and explain what your interest is in the process of reviewing manuscripts?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I'm looking forward to a really exciting and interesting session, I think, that we have planned for you today. So my name is Phil Jones, as Chris said, and I'm a member of a company called the More Brains Cooperative. And what we are is a group of 4 consultants based in both the UK and the US, and we work with publishers, we work with funders, we work with research institutions, and so forth on problems such as research assessment, workflow, various types of challenges around scholarly information, and quite a lot of work on things like persistent identifiers and information interchange. As well as that, I work on the editorial board for the journal Learned Publishing. I also am a blogger on the Scholarly Kitchen, and there should be one of my articles actually coming out on the subject of ChatGPT next week. I'm a jury member on the Karga Vesalius Innovation Awards, and an advisory member of the Research to Reader journal. In addition to that, I'm also a partner on the African Journals Partnership Program. So that's me. In terms of my sort of interest and the way I'm sort of thinking about things like assessment and review and so forth, I'm a former academic researcher myself. I started off in physics, but then I moved into biophysics. So I've been sort of cross-disciplinary for quite some time. But I left academia and moved into an academic adjacent role at a publisher called Journal of Visualized Experiments, or JOVE, because I was frustrated at some of the incentives or perverse incentives or the structures around academia and how research was valued and reviewed and so forth. So over the past sort of decade or so, I've been working sort of at the interface of technology and publishing. First of all, I mentioned Jove, which were the world's first sort of video journal that published methods. But I also spent a good deal of my career at a company called Digital Science, which is you may have heard of as being the company that invested in Symplectic and Dimensions and Altmetric, ReadCube, and so forth. So it's always been an interest of mine around that sort of assessment and discovery, and research quality certainly has always been a big issue. So today, like I said, I work with publishers, funders, and institutions on things like research quality, research assessment, interoperability, and so forth. All right, so I guess that's me. Back to you, Chris, to introduce the next person.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Phil. And our next panelist is Sven Fund. Sven, would you like to intro yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And hello, everybody. I see that you're all here from Algeria to Zambia. I think that's the greatest spread, and anything in between and beyond. So great to have a conversation around peer review. My name is Sven Fund. I'm based in Berlin, in Germany, and I'm in academic publishing since 20 years. Sounds awful, probably a little bit worse than it is, but I've been working with publishers big and small, and my focus has always been on open access, open science, and a little bit of restructuring into those business models from the existing ones. Since last year, I have the pleasure to be managing director also of Reviewer Credits, which I fondly call a hobby next to my job. And my main activities there, just to give you an idea, have been over the last 12 months really building a team, making sure that we are honing the value proposition, and also build up partnerships with different players. I guess there will be more to come in the next few weeks. My interest in peer review, I think, Chris, you asked about that as well, is that we must not oversee and must not miss the point that peer review is both a technological and a social phenomenon, or challenge, however you want to call it, project, endeavor, whatever it might be. I would like to really focus with my work on visibility and rewarding. I think it is important to create incentives to researchers to review and not just write articles. I believe in industry standards, and I think we have come a long way, but in peer review, there is still some work to be done. I think we should really put industry-wide solutions over publisher individual ones. And I'm completely convinced that publishers, maybe as a hypothesis here for later discussion, that publishers should move away from just seeing reaching out to reviewers for peer review as a direct marketing approach to more a relationship building with reviewers. And with that, back over to you, Chris. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sven. And finally, our third panelist today is Eva Grabarich-Andonovsky. Eva, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you all for coming here. I'm very happy to be a part of this week's celebration of peer review process. I'm coming from the University of Zagreb, from Faculty of Food Technology and Biotechnology, and I'm working well, for it is now 20 and a few months plus years in the Food Technology and Biotechnology Journal. I started as an editorial assistant, then assistant editor, and from 2013 I am the editor of the journal. I'm also active in EASE currently as a vice president. As perhaps a lot of you know, EASE is not only European Association of Science Editors, it became an international one with chapters all over the world. And there I am also running a Croatian regional chapter. And together with Hasib Irfanullah, we are chairing the Environment and Sustainability Committee. I'm also the secretary of Croatian Association for Scholarly Communication, which was established in 2019 because we have a strong open access movement here in Croatia, and we have a list of over 500 journals in Diamond Open Access, which are involved and available at Hrčak database. Hrčak database is a repository, and not only a repository, also actually a major focal point of all journals which are published in open access in Croatia. And I'm there serving also in Hrčak as advisory board member. We established our association, and we have a strong relationship with our Ministry of Science and Education, who is the main funder of our journals, and with the Srce University Computing Center, which is maintaining the database of Croatian journals. And also we are liaison with the between the editors of the journals and all relevant institutions and publishing services slash platforms, and we try to solve the problems of the editorial work, and especially we are trying to raise the awareness of the importance of quality editorial work and good and quality peer review. And that's why peer review is the focal point of our work, actually, because we cannot do any evaluation without our valuable peer reviewers. And that is the reason why we're always trying to improve this part in our journal also. And besides, we initiated 10 years ago the PubMed conference on scholarly communication in the context of open science, with the focus on publishing not only services, platforms, but also the future of publishing, future of open access, and metrics and alternative metrics. So we are recently have a collaboration with MDPI journal publications, and we are publishing special issues dedicated to the conference. Also, I'm working as a reviewer for European Science Editing, which is a journal of EASE, and for PubMed conference submissions. And as I said before, we are always trying to improve the quality of peer review, so we have conducted 2 surveys among the reviewers of our journal on how to improve the quality of our peer reviewing process, and on open peer review, or the possibility of conducting open peer review in our journal. Unfortunately, it is unpublished because we later saw some flaws in the design of the survey. And we also had 2 peer review week sessions from EASE and Croatian Association, which were also dedicated to peer review. So a lot of things is involving peer review as our topic of our conversations.
Super busy there, Eva.
Yes, actually, yes. Sometimes I have like several webinars like this in one day, so it could be fun.
Great. So we're going to look then a little bit at some innovations in review in a second. We already have quite a few questions from the audience, which is nice to see. But before we start addressing those, Eva, perhaps I can start with you. So peer review as a process is something which has only been kind of universally adopted fairly recently in a journal's history. So if we think of the first journal as coming in the 1600s, I think it was only after the Second World War that peer review became an accepted norm in all academic research journals. So review normally consists of finding 2 or 3 reviewers to pass comment on the relative merits of an article so that an editor can make a decision on whether to accept, reject, or revise a manuscript. Now, can you tell us what some of the challenges are to that particular process and that particular workflow in the 2020s?
I think the challenges are the same as before. The only thing that changes is the increasing number of submissions. When I started to work in the journal in 2003, we had 80 submissions per year, and now we have over 500. So you can see that a lot of progress is going on, not only for our journal, but also in the research. But since the pressure is to publish or perish, and actually the focus is in many scientific fields or countries are on the quantity and not on the quality of the published papers. Now we are experiencing more than ever, which was clearly evident during COVID, that the number of submissions is too large for us to handle, and that we have less and less time to do a quality peer review process. So first of all, it's time consuming. Then it's very hard to find available reviewers, because as our survey results from our journal pointed out, that most of the researchers which we consider as peer reviewers have received over 50 invitations. It was in 2019, so I think this number is now like 3 times bigger annually, and they actually cannot accept them all. So it's very hard to find. Sometimes we need to go through a list of, I don't know, 20 reviews to obtain 2 or 3 reviews. Then we realized that not all the reviews which we received are of good enough quality because of the lack of time. Perhaps sometimes they have not chosen the best one for the task. And not only that, the quality sometimes is not up to the highest standard, but we also experience that reviewers are making conflicting recommendations. One is to accept and the other to reject. So you need to, of course, ask for a third opinion. But sometimes it's you need to go really deep into it and to really reevaluate the paper yourself, and not only rely on the reviewer's opinion, but to also have a personal insight into it. And it's being more complicated to detect errors and fraudulent behavior, because we experienced some. For example, we had, it was like a stroke of luck that we noticed some strange behavior of 2 reviewers completing the review almost at the exact same time. And then we realized that they were ghost reviewers. Actually, the authors have managed to set up an accounts and act like they are a reviewer. Reviewers, but fortunately, since we are using the pool of our reviewers which is more or less based on the personal communications with them and with the members of the editorial board, and some of them we know personally. So it was for us easier to detect that. But if you have a large number of submissions, over 1,000, it's impossible.
Sure.
I also would say that since we have conducted a survey with the question, what would you stimulate? What will stimulate researchers to accept the peer review invitations? They only 90% of them actually had some acknowledgement from their institution. So I think their work should be acknowledged more. Perhaps that then it will be easier to find suitable reviewers. Also, we are experiencing lack of training, perhaps lack of instructions. There is an investigation of our colleagues, Jadranka Stojanovski and her co-authors, of the instructions for authors of Croatian journals, where there are a lot of technical instructions, but instructions to reviewers on how to perform a review are really scarce. So this is these are only the major things, but we can of course talk later about.
So it feels like there was a lot in there. Maybe I'll come to you next, Sven. Was there anything in there which resonated with you? I think this idea about how to incentivize reviewers and how to recognize them is something that you're interested in, right?
Yeah, well, I would say that in the past few decades that you mentioned, Chris, and that Eva spoke to, I think we basically see a professionalization, if you want, of peer review, away from a more consultative improvement of articles, which we have probably seen before that for quite a while already, into a more anonymous process to secure quality of the publication process. I'm always a little bit upset by the term research integrity. I think it is about publishing integrity and not research integrity. That's, I think, two different things. But I think that's where we are kind of seeing a functional change. And at the same time, I think Eva spoke to the volume that we see. Publishers have more and more, as I mentioned in my last remark already, basically seen this as a direct marketing approach. Let's find a reviewer who fits best with their expertise with an article to be reviewed, right, with a manuscript. I think it's more that we need, and I think it also means to give back to reviewers. That doesn't necessarily mean financial or other incentives, even though I find them legitimate, by the way. But it's first of all, recognition, really making sure that this is part of the academic record, the work that you put into peer review. I think that's really important. And that's probably now in a digital environment easier than it has been, 20 years or so ago. It's a truly global endeavor now, as we can see in the participants. I'm completely taken away by you all coming from all different places, which I think is fascinating. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that it gets the place in the evaluation system of science and research that it deserves, and that it stands for the time, basically, that reviewers invest.
Yeah. There have been a few discussions happening more frequently, I would say, in the last few years around this concept that reviewers are kind of unpaid, unappreciated players in this whole publication process, but they're absolutely an essential part of it as well. Now, it's not unusual. I think Eva mentioned there. I don't think it's unusual these days to hear about a manuscript having to have 20, 25 invitations to review it before 2 or 3 people say yes. Is that a problem with the volume of manuscripts trying to be reviewed by the same group every time? And in which case, do we need to expand the reviewer pool in some way? Or is it a problem of incentivizing the reviewers so that these reviews are more important to them than they are now? And Phil, I'll start off with you on that one. Is it a question of widening the reviewer pool or making the review job itself more interesting?
Yes, I think there is an aspect of the breadth of the reviewer pool that's involved here with this problem. It's been a problem that's been going on for some time, isn't it? That journals and journal editors simply can't find enough people to be able to review the copy flow that they've got, the manuscripts that are coming through their editorial offices. And yeah, so one of the reasons why I left academia and moved into publishing, and I think there's a clue here, is that I was frustrated by the very narrow range of behaviors and capabilities and qualifications that would get somebody advanced through academia. And I felt there was an over focus on a specific type or a subset of what it is that researchers do, the hypothesis driven part of it, if you like. And there wasn't enough credit given to people who did other things. For example, taking data and processing data and writing algorithms and statisticians and so on and so forth. And I think this has led to a little bit of a problem in that peer review is asked to do more than it possibly can. And as a result, you've got a narrow range of people who can do that sort of work. I think part of the solution is, in a sense, to broaden things out, but also in a sense to focus and specialize and break up what it is that peer review does. And good examples of this sort of thing are, specialist peer review by statisticians, for example, and types of recommendation peer review, which is sort of a bit similar to pre-registering reports, where somebody looks at it from a particular angle. Because they're a specialist in, say, research methodology, and then that's what's used to judge the quality of the research. So you broaden it out to make it a more interesting and a more meaningful task. I think also coupled with that is the fact that as the number of research practitioners has grown exponentially throughout the world, but some of the communities that we're still using are still fairly narrow, and they're often quite nationally constrained. So journals are often associated with learning societies. Learning societies are often associated with a particular country, but those societies and those journals are getting in papers from all over the world. And so the size of that sort of community that you can go to do review has not grown as much as the size of the community of contributors. So there's a fundamental mismatch in scale. And so how you reach out to that global community is going to be important to, and the way in which you do it in a way that's perhaps more inventive and more diverse in terms of the skill sets that you're looking for, I think is going to be how we tackle this problem moving forward.
Fascinating. Eva, have you experimented with any form of review which is outside of the ordinary? So here I'm thinking of open reviews or a double-blind review or a post-publication review. Have you experimented with any of these models?
No, actually, we haven't, because as we conducted a survey of our possible reviewers who would possibly want to be involved in the open peer review, well, from the answers that we received, although the sample was not that large, because we received 118, I think, answers, and most of them actually voted against it. So I think that's because we have a lot of reviewers from Croatia and neighboring countries, where open peer review is sometimes considered as the review which has to be that you have publicly disclose your name, but that is only one option for doing open peer review, and I would say the last one, because for me it shouldn't matter. The thing which we try to persuade to be more transparent is that the authors can not also communicate with the reviewers, but the reviewers can see the review of the another reviewer. So that's why we have in our online submission system the option so each one can see the comments of the other reviewers, and also they can see the authenticate report for text similarity. So these are the things that we are slowly introducing to start them to think about the opening or more transparent peer review like a normal thing to do. And actually for like publishing, well, there is a strong I think feelings against post-publication review in Croatia, because they don't find it, it's not a term relevant enough, but I cannot think of any better term. And since we are published by a small academic publisher, sometimes we just have to, agree with that and not experiment much. In Croatia, there are a lot of journals who are conducting a double-blind review, and their experiences are quite good with that. But we don't have any. Currently, we don't have any journal which is conducting open peer review, or one thing that sounds for me more interesting even is cascading peer review, but no one started to experiment with that. Although we have some publishers who have several journals, so they could use that way.
And by cascading review, you mean if a manuscript is rejected after review, the reviews can be shared with a resubmission somewhere else?
Yes, that's what I meant, yes.
Okay.
And that is something which we actually initiated several years ago with our, it's like a sister society journal, but it didn't fall on 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 the fertile soil, and that is the expression in Croatia. So they were not. They had some troubles with restructuring their management. So and finally they actually are rarely publishing their issues. So there are not many journals in our field in Croatia which share some similarities on the topic, so it will be difficult to do.
So I prepared quite a lot of questions for us in advance, but we've had so many from the audience so far. I'm going to abandon some of them, and I'm going to pick some of the Q&As from the audience that are particularly relevant to peer review innovation. And actually just harking back to an earlier point about incentivizing peer reviewers. There's a question here from Philip Newman. What incentives for peer reviewers would help?
Well, maybe I'll try on this one. I think there is this misconception of incentives around peer review where publishers often argue that they believe reviewers want to be paid their hourly rate for peer review. I think that is not the question. I mean, obviously everybody would like that, but I guess nobody's expecting it really. So I think it is a sign of appreciation. And what we do at Review Credits is really focus on rewarding reviewers through a token system with basically reinvestments into their publishing activity as researchers. So if you do a year review, the publisher decides to basically reward you with 100 credit points. You could spend these credit points on language editing, on statistical checks that you mentioned, Phil, on many other things that you can basically check out in a online shop, a little bit like your airline mileage shop, basically, and you can reinvest it into publishing. I think that would be a great start because, frankly, a lot of publishers have to make these investments anyhow. And putting control over those into the hands of researchers, reviewers, can't be a bad idea. So that's where I would personally start. And I can tell you that I feel we have a little bit of a biased conversation right now. The fastest growing publishers are already putting quite some incentives up, monetary incentives, access to content, and so on for their reviewers. So let's be transparent about it, and let's see where these incentives are and what they are. I think also monetary incentives might be a way, frankly. I guess we also need to discuss then what the limits are. So we probably don't want professional reviewers only, as we don't want professional article writers only, but we want basically researchers doing this as part of their research remit. And I think it shouldn't be difficult in a networked world, if you want, to basically put certain limits and certain controls on that.
Okay.
If I can add something, all the surveys, including the one that we have conducted, actually pointed out that the researchers are not expecting some monetary compensation. Actually, the one thing that they want the most is the acknowledgement of their work, especially by their institutions. So, for example, if he's a young postdoc researcher, and he has a lot of obligations and limited time to do a review. But if his institute or her institution would appreciate that, I don't know how many reviews annually is equivalent to his engagement in some other activities which are obligatory to him or her, that would be the way also. But I would recommend to other journals, if they are not using any way of accreditation for reviewers, to consider at least to publish their names as in the acknowledgement once per year, or to, like our journal is using reviewer credits, or perhaps Pablons, although you should pay for that, but as a journal, not as a reviewer. So you can use any of these platforms, or you can connect your ORCID profile, etc. So there are ways to receive acknowledgement.
Yeah.
But I think on the institutional side, we need to work on that.
Yeah.
Still.
Great. Thanks, Eva. So I'm going to paraphrase a couple of questions here and kind of merge them up. But Phil, I'm going to come to you with this one. So earlier, Sven mentioned that the review process is both a technical and social phenomenon. And I think one of the issues we have with reviews right now is it seems to be very much dominated by a Western male, middle-aged academics. How can we think about ensuring that future reviews are more reflective of the audience of a journal when it comes to things like not only nationality, but gender and other factors? Are there any innovations on the horizon there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's a really sort of critically important component of it, and I think it's even a little bit worse than you've suggested there, because very often it is those middle-aged white Western academics who are getting credit for those reviews, but in many cases those reviews are sometimes ghost written by postdocs and people who are not receiving the credit for even doing it at all. So it's a little bit worse, I think, than the situation that you described. But yeah, there is definitely a need to open things out significantly. And I talked a little bit about that sort of decoupling of the inner sort of circle of privilege of modern academia and the much bigger expanse of people who are participating in research. And I think that in the long term, and this is going to have to be a long-term problem, right? It's not something that you can easily fix quickly. I think in the long term, there is a need to get back to something that's more built around community. Because what I think has happened is that as there's been large amounts of consolidation in scholarly publishing, many of those sort of traditional communities have sort of still continued to meet for things like conferences and so forth, but they're a little bit less connected to the journal than they used to be. And I think that's partly because of the consolidation, and it's also partly because research has shifted over the past sort of 50 years, in fact. And shifted is perhaps the wrong term, but it used to be purely disciplinary. You know, a chemist would go to university and study chemistry and do chemistry things, and then a geographer would go and do geography things and write about geography in journals and so forth. But today we're moving much more to a transdisciplinary, problem-oriented research space. We're looking at global climate change. We're looking at global health, at food security. These are problems that require much different disciplines to come together. And so our traditional view of what the academic community looks like is starting to mismatch what the academic community actually looks like. The new one is much more global, it's much more transdisciplinary, and so we need to make sure that we're embracing that. And part of that, I think, involves sort of decoupling the traditional publishing workflow from the process of collaboratively creating research together. So we start to see things like preprint servers and repositories and approaches like that, which are decoupled from the publishing process. They give you an ability to work across different disciplines and across different countries. And then once that piece of research has reached a point where it's mature, it can then go through an appropriate publishing channel. Now, this isn't now the sort of thing is with an innovation, right? Is just because something's an innovation to you doesn't mean it's an innovation to me, and vice versa. These sorts of approaches have been going on for a long time in certain areas of academia. High energy physics, for example, with the distribution lists that folks at Stanford created back in the 60s, where librarians would send research papers that were preprints effectively to different physicists throughout America, who would then feed back and do review even before it was ever submitted to a journal. So if we can do something a little bit like that using modern technology, using things like preprint servers and archive and those sorts of approaches, I think we can sort of rescope this and make it a much more collaborative, much more inclusive endeavor.
Interesting. I have lots of thoughts about that, but I won't share them right now. This isn't about me. We haven't mentioned yet the scepter of AI. And there are a lot of AI questions in the chat, as you might imagine. There are two that I'm going to pose to you all. The first one is, how is AI enhancing the future of review, particularly in terms of expediting the process and improving accuracy? I guess this is a theoretical future state rather than something that exists now.
I just wanted to say that we had a session about artificial intelligence and its use in research and evaluation of the research at our PubMed conference a week ago in Zadar. So actually, conclusion is that although, it depends on the field, of course, but for example, in the field of which we are covering in our journal of biotechnology and especially genetic engineering, AI tools are not quite there yet, because they can only understand the things for which we are making an input in. So, for example, any analysis of the text given to AI would depend on the quality of the input in that tool. So we had some colleagues from our faculty who were experimenting with AI tools, and I wanted to write a paper or to write at least an introduction. And depending on their topic, the AI tool was less or more successful in that. It was especially challenging in the field of biotechnology and genetic engineering because the relationship of the subjects that matter is not always clear to the scientists and even less to the AI tool. But I think it could help a lot, especially in finding available reviewers, in checking their identities, which is really time-consuming task.
That may also help to kind of expand the
yes,
reviewer pool.
I think in that way, I think I'm looking forward to it. Actually, it will help my work immensely. So I think there is a room for that, but I'm not sure that it will replace, because I saw some questions whether it will replace the peer reviewing process by peer reviewers. I don't think we are quite there yet. Perhaps one day in the future, but for now, no. It's far away from that.
Sven, how is AI going to enhance the future of the review process?
Yeah, I'm playing the grumpy old man here if I can. So I think, obviously, what AI can do right now already is great, right? If we look at what has happened in terms of digitization over the last 15 years compared to the last 15 months, I think we see a great jump forward. And we now realize that putting papers out of printed journals online is not really digitization, but we are now getting to the point where data businesses and also businesses that help us kind of query databases and get answers to questions and not just get tons of content are obviously making a difference, both in content production, which is a challenge, I can tell you from my teaching experience, but also from reviewing content. So at the same time, I would say if we would have made full use of all the technical possibilities out there in peer review over the last 20 years already, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I would say that there is additional elements, and that's what I mean by the social and probably a little bit slowing element that we see in academic publishing. It is still a pretty conservative field compared to others, especially when we come to the business side of it. There is not that great enthusiasm to pick up everything that you can right away and run with it. But I guess given the characteristics of our industry, there's a lot of people who sit and wait and say, this is not for my generation anymore. This is not for me right now. And I don't mean scientists, but rather publishers, people in publishing. With that, probably also scientists, but my point is publishers. So long story short, I think it is a great chance for the industry. I think it will completely change our concept of the value of content, at least. I think that has already changed. You can see that already. The availability and ubiquitous availability of almost every content with open access now being the dominant output format is great, right? Yet at the same time, I think we have to carefully look where this makes sense or not. So literature reviews, for example, I think for that AI is completely fit already. Tools and methods in research papers, I doubt it. And I'm really critical about the kind of creative elements, like the very forefront of research, where we see a lot of combinations of formerly unknown elements, which a large language model itself can't detect, in my understanding. So, yeah, but exciting times, at least, to be in peer review. More interesting than probably 20 years ago.
I have one more question I would like to ask, and then I invite my fellow panelists to look through the questions and answers, the questions that have been posed by the audience, and I will ask you to pose one of them to your colleagues in a second. But very closely related to what we were talking about at the end there, Ray Arsight said, is it possible that in the future AI can do peer reviews? And I guess a kind of follow-on question from that is, if so, what does that mean for journals in the future, whose main value add seems to be the review process?
Phil, do you want to answer this one first?
Sure, I can have a go at this one. So will AI be able to do peer review? Certainly, none of the current technologies are going to be the basis of automated peer review at that level. So what we've got so far is we've got things like machine learning, we've got machine vision, and we've got these large language models, generative AI. And none of those things have even the sort of narrow specialist intelligence that would be required to make judgments about things, and they're certainly a long way away from generalized intelligence. So there was a bit of a sort of a panic earlier this year when ChatGPT came out and people were typing things into it and making it say all sorts of scary stuff. But the reality is that those things, those generative transformer models, all they really are is you can think of them like a fancy autocomplete. Right, they're a language model. They're generating words that fit together in sentences that make sense. They're not actually generating meaning, and so they don't have judgment, and so they can't answer questions about whether this, the findings are supported by the data or whatever sort of question you want to ask. That said, there are certainly ways in which AI and particularly machine learning are going to be helpful and already very helpful in the peer review process. And so if we separate it out from saying, can it do peer review to is it helpful in the process? The answer is absolutely yes. So there's, some basic workflow type stuff, which people already have. Many publishers already have tools which are using AI under the hood. And so a lot of people who are listening to this webinar are probably already using it. They may not even know that they're using it because it's part of a tool that they're using. But it's also very good, as Eva said, for potentially very powerful for reviewer selection, right? It can identify in the literature individuals who've written about similar sorts of things and maybe an expansion, maybe useful for a particular peer review. So it's a way to expand that pool of reviewers. I think further down the line, the work that's been done by quite a few different organizations around topic modeling is going to be increasingly useful around the research graph. So there are a number of companies who are doing work around this, and it's essentially you do natural language processing and machine learning to a large corpus of research articles, and you can use those computational processes to spit out a map of the disciplines and topics that are covered by the research. This allows you to detect new emerging disciplines, convergences of disciplines, divergence of disciplines, that sort of thing, in a way that is driven by the content rather than the traditional taxonomical approach of having a bunch of experts sat in a room deciding what the landscape looks like. So combining the human component of that with the machine learning component of that, and you can create some really impressive connections between all of the content and all of the research that's being produced. If you then combine that with an approach to having individuals do collaborative review of different components of a piece of research, perhaps in an open science way. So you've got somebody looking at data, you've got somebody looking at, the methodology or whatever it happens to be, then you can really make something that's much more powerful, that's much more diverse and collaborative, and also stands a better chance of catching the problematic papers that we all know and love from our history of seeing high profile retractions and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I think in the future it's going to make things a lot more powerful. But like everything, there's the hype cycle. We're right at the top now. There's going to be a little bit of a sort of a crash of expectation, and then in the long term, I think you're going to see something similar to, I hope, what I've just described there. That's going to be very, very useful.
Yes, yes. I would also add that in big data manipulation and statistical analysis and image manipulation analysis, actually, a lot of AI tools are already available. So I don't think that it will replace the human input. It's the same in the movie industry. You have AI tools for ages now, and still we have actors, directors, etc. So I don't think that will change a lot.
Okay, we are approaching the end. I've asked my fellow panelists if they can identify any interesting questions in the list, so I'm not just the one filtering everything that I find interesting. I would like to apologize to everyone, by the way. We've had unbelievable number of questions. If we stayed here for another 3 or 4 hours, I don't think we'd have time to answer them all.
I see a lot of questions, and I would like to add that you can reach to me with particular questions if they are left unanswered. And I see a lot of questions about peer review guidelines, and I want to point out that EASE has a peer review committee, which has a nice set of guidelines for editors, peer reviewers, infographic, etc. So you can check that on the EASE website, ease.org.uk. And actually, a lot of resources are available on the website, so you can easily find it. And to become a reviewer, well, first you should do research, publish, and then advertise yourself. Don't have like a blank profile on the ResearchGate or Publons or wherever, or Kite. Just fill in your data. What have you published so far? You can approach the journal directly. We are receiving a lot of inquiries, and everyone is more than welcome to be a reviewer for our journal. So.
Great. Yeah, there were a lot of questions about how to learn to be a reviewer, and also how to let a journal know you are willing to review. So thank you for that. Sven, did you find any questions in there particularly interesting that I haven't already tried to cover?
Well, I find the training question interesting, and I think it's not just a matter of having the resources, but also using them. Because if we see that 40% of researchers say that they are still untrained and are being thrown into peer review, not really knowing what they are doing. So my question, if I understand the ask correctly, Chris, my question to Phil would be, what do journals and publishers need to do to better train early career researchers, particularly for reviewing, and by that establishing, if you want, an industry standard?
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's a complicated and difficult question. Right. So I remember first being sent something to review when I was a postdoctoral researcher, and having literally no idea of how to review it. Nobody had taught me, nobody had introduced me to it. I was just basically sent this thing and said, "Tell me what you think about it." And of course, my response was, "I don't know." So it's a massively steep learning curve, and people are basically just thrown in the water and told to swim. But that's also true about writing articles. It's also true about, or it certainly was when I was a student and a postdoc. Also true about doing literature reviews. So I think this problem isn't just about peer review, but it's about general sort of research skills and general skills around participating in the community as a whole. We tend to, when people go through university and they train to be a researcher, we tend to teach them the history of their subject, and then we set them going at a PhD level on doing a project. And then we expect them to be able to do all of these things, from from managing other people through to understanding how literature is interconnected with each other, to understanding how to do quality control, and all these things that nobody has taught them to do. So I think it starts early. And I think that there's been some good progress in graduate programs around things like learning how to use literature. And I think that needs to improve. There needs to be more of that. And I think there needs to be, there basically needs to be university courses on how to be a peer reviewer. I also think it helps if publishers make things simpler. So when you go to a journal website today, one of the big things that you might notice when you look at the instructions for authors and you look at the instructions for reviewers is they're very often a massive wall of text. They're often overlong, they're too complicated, they're quite legally written. And so as a result, researchers don't typically read them. So put a comm strategy around how you communicate your author guidelines and how you communicate your reviewer guidelines. Make it simple and make the distinction about your journal obvious, so that it's really easy for someone to get a sense of what they're supposed to be doing when they are given one of these tasks.
Lovely. Phil, you've finished answering that question at about 30 seconds before we're about to wrap up. So all that I have time to do is to alert everyone to the fact that you can get some special 40 and 50% off some of the Cactus services here on the screen. Just have a look at the code there. And I want to thank my panelists today, Eva, Phil, and Sven. It feels like we've only just started, and honestly, we could easily go for another hour and not scratch the surface. So thank you, everyone, as well. The audience questions have been fantastic, and I look forward to having a similar conversation with you all again next year. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you all, and it was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the next opportunity to chat with you all.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Great audience. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes, very engaged audience. I like that a lot. And as I said, feel free to reach us so we can answer some questions later.
That's great. Thanks, Eva.